Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of Roleplay Chat. I'm Matt, a game master who can't stop talking about role-playing games. Welcome to another episode. Today we're going to be talking about making mistakes as a game master and as a player. Today's episode was a lot of fun to record. I recorded it with Willow from the RPG Goblin, and it felt kind of cathartic to let some of these quote-unquote horror stories or mistake stories and gaming failures out. The intention here today is really to just air our grievances and make sure that you know that if you make mistakes, you're not alone. We all make mistakes, we're all human, and we can all learn from our mistakes. Before we get into today's episode, I did want to share a message from a friend of the show, Nick, over at Tabletop Podcast. So here's a short message from Nick and the Tabletop Podcast crew, and then we'll dive into today's episode.
Welcome to Tabletop. My name is Nick, and I think that fudging dice rolls is totally okay.
Hey, it's me, Franco, and rolling for initiative sucks.
I'm Daniel, and I think you should modify your first level characters as much as you want.
And I'm Shade, and if your TTRPG hasn't evolved into a LARP, you've done it wrong.
And we all host Tabletop, a TTRPG podcast about all things games and storytelling.
And sometimes we have game designers, professional researchers, and even the occasional owlbear.
If this interests you, listen to Tabletop every Monday wherever you get your podcasts. Tabletop is a proud member of the Helios Network.
Thanks for that, Nick and friends, and now let's dive right into today's episode about making mistakes and learning from failure. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Roleplay Chat. I'm Matt, a game master who cannot stop talking about role-playing games. Today, I am honored to be joined by somebody who is relatively new, I'd say, in the TTRPG space, but still making a pretty big splash. They have a fantastic podcast that you definitely need to be listening to, especially if you're looking to try out some new role-playing games or you're curious to hear people geek out about some of the games that you might have heard of and haven't had the opportunity to play yet. Please join me in welcoming Willow from the RPG Goblin. Willow, welcome to Roleplay Chat.
Yeah, thank you so much, and such a nice introduction there. Thank you.
Hey, my pleasure, my pleasure. Why don't before we start talking about today's topic, which
Mhm.
I'm super eager to get
I
into,
know, same.
why don't you let the listeners of Roleplay Chat know a little bit more about yourself, and just to kind of help frame the recommendations and insights that you're going to be sharing today, I'd love for you to talk about your style of play and game mastering as you introduce yourself. So tell us a little bit more
Yeah.
about the RPG Goblin, and then talk to us about you as a player and game master.
Cool. Yeah. So, like Matt said, I am Willow. I run the RPG Goblin, which was a podcast that spawned out of me getting obsessed with TTRPGs, and I wouldn't stop talking about them, specifically to my parents, until my mom looked at me and was like, "I love you, but you need to start a podcast," because she just didn't understand anything I was saying. And so that's what I did. And, the exact idea for what the RPG Goblin was going to be took a little bit until, OGL happened. And I'm like, I want to learn about new TTRPGs. I want to know more about them. And I want to be able to talk to people. So that's what the RPG Goblin is. We explore TTRPGs through fun conversations with guests. We laugh a lot. We haven't cried yet. But, yeah, and so we've spotlighted games such as, like, Vampire the Masquerade, both editions of Pathfinder, Monster of the Week, Electric Bastionland, uh, Dead Letter Society. There's literally so many. Merkborg, Alien RPG, like, I could
Awesome, yeah.
continue to go on, but I've had this podcast so far for a little over a year, and
That's
so
awesome. Wow,
yeah.
congratulations. That's
Thank you. Yeah,
I
no,
was just
it's
looking at your oldest episode was in January of
mhm.
2023. So I guess my statement of being a new player is not appropriate. Like, it's been a year. That's
Yeah.
you reached a big milestone there.
Yeah, which was amazing. For, like, the anniversary, we did, like, a whole bunch of things, and that was just really fun. Did, like, a Q&A type thing, and that was just great. But, yeah, no, I have loved running the RPG Goblin. I would definitely recommend it to anyone who is looking to explore new games and don't really know where to start, since there are just so many out there. But
Mhm.
A bit more about me. I've been playing TTRPGs for around 7-ish years, I want to say. There was a bit of a break in between this time, with like COVID and stuff like that. But I originally started with D&D. I played my first experience with D&D was playing in a public game with a pre-generated character and not having any idea what was going on, but I killed, like, the big monster that we were fighting, and I felt so cool, and so I decided, "Yeah, I wanna continue doing this." And so we played through, Curse of Strahd, we played through, Tomb of Annihilation, there's some other, like, we split off into some private games and started some, like, homebrew adventures and things like that during that time, and it was an absolute blast. Like, that's definitely where my love for TTRPGs came from, was playing D&D with all these people.
Awesome.
And, COVID happened, took a bit of a break, started to play online with some people, and I would say, at the start of playing D&D, my play style would have very much been just wanting to experience the story. Like, when I started out, I really didn't know how to role play a character. I didn't really know, how to, like, create a backstory and really get into it in that way.
Mm.
But I always enjoyed that aspect of the game. My brother was really good at that. He was really good at role playing, and I always admired that. I'm like, "Man, I wanna play like that." And so when I picked back up again in, that online game during COVID, I decided I'm gonna try to do better at role playing. Like, finally, I'm gonna work on it, and so I created, like, a swarm keeper ranger named Moxie who had, like, a little swarm of fish, which was I still love that character, and I started to get into role playing more, and it felt really good. I was getting into it. I didn't do voices yet because I was still nervous about that, but then, fast forward a little bit, I reunite with my siblings of, "Hey, like, let's play TTRPGs again, that'll be really fun." Reunite with a old friend, and we decide to actually start playing games
Nice.
together. And we started with D&D, and that was actually my first ever character that I felt like I role played correctly. And, her name was Genevieve, and she was like a genie warlock, and she had, like, a little bit of a Russian accent, but I just had a really fun time, and over the course of playing more games, I've definitely my playstyle has become a lot of role play centric, character centric. I want to build those relationships. I want to interact as characters and get really into the story like that. And as a GM, which I've only been GMing for about 2 years now, I started off with a D&D game, and for a GM, I love the see, this is a little bit weird. I both love heavy prep. I love heavy prep and, basically sitting down to do your homework as a
Mhm.
GM, and I also love complete improv writing 3 lines of prep. So when I describe myself as a GM, I usually describe myself as more of an improv GM because I've been doing that a little bit longer. Um, but I do have an immense love for prep. And so what I end up liking to do is do a lot of prep of like exactly how the story's going to go, or not exactly how the story's going to go, but like all of the inspiration for the story and kind of the
Yeah.
beats that I want. And then I will write that out, and then I will basically not even look at my notes while I play the game. Like, I'll just kind of remember exactly what's supposed to be going on, and then all the interactions and NPCs and things that show up is usually improv. And
Mhm.
that's kind of how I like doing my GMing, at least. And so I would describe myself as a heavy prep improv GM, which
Okay,
is
okay.
super contradicting, but
Prepare a
I would
lot
say
to be able
yeah.
to improvise a lot, right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. It's I like to like, Monster of the Week is a great example of what I like to do is, there would be those mysteries. You would have, like,
Yeah.
basically mystery arcs. You would do a lot of prep at the beginning to kinda set up the arc, what's going to be happening and NPCs, locations, stuff like that. And then I would never touch my prep again for the rest of that arc, and I would just work
Mm,
off of that one sheet. And then if I had to do it again, it would be, I don't know, 5, 6 sessions later, I would then do another set of prep just for that arc. That's what I really like
cool,
specifically.
cool, cool, cool. That's great. That's great to hear, and I'm glad. I'm actually quite glad to hear that it's only taken you 2 years to like explore other systems because
Yeah.
I know for me personally, I was entrenched in D&D for a very long time.
Mhm.
Um, and I feel like the sooner you branch out into a different system, the sooner you can realize and grow and like see your potential as a game master
Yes.
or as a player. Like it's really
Absolutely.
you kind of get tunnel vision, right? When you're just playing one system, you get this ideology of what
Mhm.
the game is supposed to be like, and then you play a different game and you like the blinders come off and you're like, "Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, fiasco? What is this?" Like or whatever, you know?
Yeah, I don't know what I'm doing here. Honey heist? What do you mean bear criminals? What do you mean
Yeah.
2 stats? What is this? No,
Totally,
absolutely. And,
totally.
I've been really lucky with that specifically because 'cause I've had a group that's been very open. Well,
Nice.
most of my group has been very open to trying new systems, and so it only took about a year, to start playing Monster of the Week because around the time that I first started my D&D game, that I was running, that's when I found out about Monster of the Week and the fact that it was well, I knew about Monster of the Week beforehand, I just never realized it was different than D&D until then. And so
Yeah.
I got it,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
read it,
yeah.
I fell in love, and I'm like, "Okay, we're playing a Monster of the Week game, like, no matter what, next campaign, it's gonna be Monster of the Week, or we're gonna start another game, and it's gonna be Monster of the Week." It's happening one way or another.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Well, it's nice to have people who are willing to do that too, right?
Absolutely.
And sometimes it's a lot of different factors come into
Mhm,
play. Um, maybe not just willingness, but to have
mhm.
everything kind of line up is great.
Yeah,
So I think that's really great context for people listening, Willow. I think that's really good. It's going to help frame what we're going to talk about today.
exactly, yeah.
And I'm going to try my best to be the devil's advocate here because I'm
Mhm,
also the kind of person who likes story
mhm,
and immersing myself in a character.
mhm.
But for the sake of representing as many people as we can, I'm going to try to focus a little bit on the combat and a little
Yeah,
bit on the stat blocks and things like that. But
yeah.
it's going to be hard.
I
I'm
mean,
uh,
like,
I'm going to struggle with that, but I'm going to do my best. Um,
don't get me wrong, I love that as well, like, I love getting, like, into the story and getting into the narrative and the imagination, but I am such a huge mechanics person. I love
okay,
mechanics,
cool, cool, cool,
I
cool.
love reading TTRPG books for fun. It's a great pastime, like
Okay, yeah. So there's no getting away from the systems
yeah.
deep down. Yeah, okay,
Mhm,
that's good. That's good to know. So yeah, so here we are, and today we're gonna talk about making mistakes and failure as a game master and as a player. And I think we're gonna do our very best to paint this in as positive a light as possible,
mhm,
right? Because I think, and I'm sure you agree, Willow, and you feel free to disagree,
yeah.
but failure and mistakes are an opportunity for us to grow
Yes.
in all things, not just in playing games with our friends, but in all things.
Mhm,
So the sooner we can make mistakes, the sooner we can learn from them, assuming we're going into the right mindset and we're
mhm,
preparing ourselves properly to learn from those mistakes. So I'm
absolutely.
hoping that in our conversation today, we can kind of get to that, like figure out some of your mistakes, some of my
Mhm,
mistakes, how we learn from them, and then try to replicate those scenarios for other people listening so that they can kind of be on the same page.
yeah.
Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really important, especially of knowing that it is okay to make mistakes and
Hmm.
that it is something that you can, grow past and move past. And yeah, accepting that is really difficult. And that's I can even say myself up front. Yeah, I've made quite a few mistakes in my games, and it's taken me a long time to be okay with that, especially
Hmm.
as like a new GM. It's scary because you don't know exactly what you're doing, and then you make a mistake, and especially if it affects other people at the table. It can feel horrifying to be like, "I ruined their fun," or anything like that, so
Yeah.
I definitely get it.
Yeah, I actually, and I think that this is a really good place for us to have some like I think we ought to give a couple of caveats here,
Mhm,
and we won't. I don't think we'll get too into them because these are things that come up often. But I
mhm,
think, especially in the context of trying new things,
mhm,
making mistakes, it's hard not to feel that way, like you described. Like,
Absolutely.
people are coming over to your house or you're going somewhere and they're dedicating their Friday night out of
Mhm.
their busy schedules to play games with you. Uh, and then, yeah, if you botch it, there can be a little bit of that pressure. So I
Mhm.
think, first of all, we have to, like, I think it's important to validate that. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
it might feel that way, and it's
Yeah.
okay for it to feel that way. But I think an important caveat here is for us to make sure that people listening know to do this kind of stuff in a trusted space. So, like
Absolutely.
everything else in this game, you want to make sure you're playing with people that you trust,
Mhm.
people that you can talk to openly about the mistake afterwards and kind of
Give
get
you that
feedback,
support.
get the support, or give them the forewarning, like, hey, I've never tried X or Y or Z
Mhm.
before. So, like, make sure that you're protecting your safety and the safety of the people that you're playing with by having those kinds of conversations before.
Yes.
Um,
Absolutely. I love that.
yeah, yeah. So once you've done that, now get into the meat of it and yeah, let's
Mistake.
talk about us messing up.
Yeah, let's talk about messing up. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. So let's put our game master hat on. Willow,
Wish I had a
you're
hat now.
you're the one that suggested this topic
I
to me.
did.
So I
Yeah.
don't feel bad asking you this. Tell me about a really big mess up that you've done playing
Ooh.
role-playing games, running a role-playing game.
Absolutely. Yeah, of course, started off with a heavy hitter. So, no, I am the one who suggested this, and I suggested it especially because I think it is, I mean, for me especially, it's good for me to talk about it and, like, still be able to work through that, but at the same time, I just want I want it to be, something that other people hear and that, mistakes are okay. But so, probably the biggest mistake I've made as a GM so far has been, and it's actually what killed my original D&D game that I started to run. It
Oh,
was my
no.
first ever campaign, is that I railroaded my players.
Mm,
And, you hear that come up a lot and exactly what the definition of railroading is and all of that. But in this specific scenario, there's a lot of backstory to, what led up to this in this game, but I'll try and simplify it. So this was my first ever D&D campaign that I ran. It was completely homebrew and, fun place to start off.
yeah, it's a lot of you're giving yourself a lot of challenges there for sure.
Exactly, and I wrote a lot of the story and, world and all of that before I even started the game. There was not a space where we discussed expectations of what kind of story we wanted to play,
Mm,
and that ended up, kind of rocking some boats in the game itself and causing things to start to crumble from that, and as a GM, my entire party loved this game. This was we loved our characters, we loved the world that was there, we loved the stories that we were telling, and we loved all these interactions. And because I knew that, when things started to kind of fall apart from the story, and one of the big things is that I added way too much. And so there were like a million branching paths, and I was trying to find a way to connect them all into one
mhm,
cohesive story for everyone. And this even comes as a mistake as I was trying to fix something that I wrote like a year before. And now that I know better as a GM now, it's like, oh God, what did I do? But in trying to fix those mistakes, I had like a whole notebook where I kept trying to work through the story. Like, okay, what needs to happen in what order? What needs to happen to try and fix this?
mm,
And so we got to a point in the game where they went to this party, this like masquerade ball party thing, and they wanted to talk to the newly appointed king, and they had an in for that because they were about to go off to do this war. That was super connected to one of the characters. They've been trying to rally people to help them with this war and all of that. And so we get to this party and we get to the king, but the whole lead up to that was my players going off and doing a million other things. And so I had the plot continue to go in the background. And so if they would have gotten there sooner, and this isn't the railroad part, but if they would have gotten there sooner, they would have been able to talk to the king before any deals were made. But by
Mm.
the point that they got to this king, he already made a deal with the place they were going to be going to war to, or war with. And so there was that connection. And so when they talk to him, they find this out and they realize like, oh shit, we're screwed. Sorry.
Mm.
But realize that they're screwed. And so then they start to, okay, let's try and fix this. We got to get out, because then like a
Yeah.
bunch of soldiers come out. And in my mind, because I tried to, plan out everything on how we could keep this story going. In my mind, the only way it could keep going forward is if they were captured in that room. If they were captured and then sent to the place that they needed to go to. That was the only way. And so my players started to try and like use magic and things like that to try and escape. And I kept shooting down every single one of their things,
Mm.
which I will say how that felt as a GM, but we're just gonna push through it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I shot through every single one of them, and I shot down everything. And I'm like, nope, this doesn't work. This doesn't work. This doesn't work. And inevitably they get captured because that's what I wanted to happen. That's what railroading is. I wanted it to happen, so it was going to happen, and so I made it. Um, and later on they're like in these cells, and they wanted to keep trying things further, but at that point they it was already done. They couldn't do
Yeah.
anything.
It's a done deal.
And one of my players got really, really frustrated from this and was lamenting on like, man, I wish I could have done this, I wish I could have done that. And we ended the session there, kind of like a cliffhanger. We'll resolve that the next time. That is the last session that we ever played of that game.
Mm.
And that is because immediately after it ended, I felt horrible. I felt terrible that I did that, because, the entire time leading up to this game, they could do what they wanted. Like, it was very much open world. I never wanted to shoot down ideas because I didn't find that fun
Yeah.
personally. And to feel like I had to get to a point in that game, the only way to salvage it was through forcing this ending on the players, felt terrible to me. And then everyone wasn't having fun there. I wasn't having fun, and that's what made me realize that game needed to end. I'm like, there's no way that I can keep doing this without making these types of mistakes, doing these types of things. That's
Yeah.
just going to make me feel terrible. And so that's probably the biggest mistake I've made as a GM so far. I'm only like 2 years in, but that one has been something that's weighed on me for a while, until I told my players like, yeah, we we have to end this. I just
Yeah.
can't.
Need a break.
Yeah.
Oof, Willow, that's a big one. I wasn't expecting to have such a heavy hitter, but yeah,
Yeah.
that's hard. And I sympathize, like that's not a
Mhm.
fun situation to be in.
No.
Um
And it's
and
hard to
you
admit to
can
people too, especially
totally.
with what people think about railroading. I don't like railroading either. I've gotten railroaded in games before, and I know how that feels. And, I know depending on your play style, there might be ways that you enjoy it and there might be not. But
Yeah.
knowing also people's perceptions on that and admitting that like I railroaded in my game is
Yeah.
hard.
That's tough. And I think, yeah, like you said, like railroading can be okay in
Mhm.
some situations, but the removal of player agency
Exactly.
combined with the railroading can be tricky. And I think that that's usually what people mean when they
Mhm.
talk about railroading. Like
Exactly.
the big bad railroad is really the prevention of what the players are trying to do to
Yeah.
solve whatever it is.
They can't
So
change how it's gonna end.
yeah,
They have no ability, they have no agency. They are going through your story. And
yeah,
that's where I
that's
realized,
tough.
where it's like, yeah, no, that's exactly what just happened.
But I can also I can from the story you're telling here, you obviously were doing it from a place of kindness.
Mhm.
Like you obviously wanted to have all of the characters' stories interconnect and have
Yep.
the greater narrative looped in, and like you were trying to juggle all these balls.
Mhm.
It was coming from a place of kindness. Sometimes it takes you doing it to realize, like in your head, sometimes you think a plan is sound,
Mhm.
and then you take the paper out and put it
Yeah.
into execution, and
And
that
you're like,
during
"Oh,
the
no."
execution, yeah, you're like, oh no, what am I doing? But it's too late. You've started. The
Mhm.
train has left the station.
Mhm. They're on the rails. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, no, and it was, it like fully my intention was to try and make this game work. Especially because it was my baby. It was the first ever game that I ran. I was so happy and like everyone loved their characters and I loved all the characters and it's like I want to make this work. And
Yeah.
I can even say now from no. At the time, a big reason I ended the game was because of that incident and realizing that, like, I'm basically gonna have to be fighting, this fighting against the game and against what other things are happening to try
Mm.
and make this work, so that ended it, but, you know, at this point, I realized that there were so many other mistakes, in that campaign that even led to that point, so it's like a Jenga tower that's, like, very, very precariously, like, standing and, like, all that happened was the railroading was taking one piece out and it just all fell, you know? Like, you knew it was gonna fall eventually, it's just what that last straw was gonna be.
Yeah, yeah. But at the same time, like while I agree with you, I think that there's still a lot of room for mistakes in a game.
Oh,
Like you could
absolutely.
definitely make a lot of mistakes and people can be okay with it.
I
But,
agree, yeah.
but sometimes the tension can be high. Like it sounds like that evening when the game was done, people were mad, including
Mhm.
you. Like it
Yeah.
sounded like people were not happy, and that's the killer of a game.
Mhm.
It's not
Exactly. It was not
the
having fun anymore. I
yeah,
wasn't having
yeah.
fun and they weren't having fun. That was the ultimate killer because I was even trying to work through my own head. How can I keep this game going even from this point? Because railroading one time is not a game killer. That is
Mhm.
not something that's worth like ending an entire campaign because you did it one time. Absolutely not. Any mistake, absolutely not.
Totally,
It's
totally.
just it was the thing that was just the last straw that
Yeah, yeah,
realize
yeah,
that
yeah.
made me realize that no one was having fun.
Well, that's quite the mistake, and I'm gonna have a hard time following that one up. But maybe I'll
Yeah.
share I'll share a couple of my mistakes to
Yeah,
add to the
absolutely.
flavor of the week here.
Flavor of the week.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm gonna say two, and I'll try to tell them quickly.
Mhm,
One was one of the first times I game mastered as well,
mhm,
and it was a fight that was supposed to happen in the rain outside of a town,
mhm.
outside of like the walls of a village. My
Nice vibes.
players, yeah, it was raining. They're outside of the town. They're working their way to the town, and they get attacked by dire wolves.
Mhm.
And they're fighting the dire wolves. This was back in fourth edition, D&D fourth
Okay.
edition, where combat was even longer than it is. Like it was excruciatingly long.
Mhm.
Um, I didn't know that. It was the first time I'd game mastered D&D fourth edition. It was the first time my players had, like, some of the players were first time players too.
Mhm.
This fight against three dire wolves took us 5 hours because
Oh
I didn't,
my
like, people
goodness.
didn't understand the rules.
Uh-huh.
I didn't know that my job as the game master was to, like, find a way for this fight to end. Like,
Yeah.
after an hour, you're supposed to, like, do something to make it move on. But I
Yeah,
was like,
yeah,
no, I'm just playing the game. Took
yeah. Yeah.
5 hours of fighting three dire wolves in the rain because they were, like, caught
Oh,
in mud
man.
and there was, like,
Mhm,
difficult terrain. And then, anyway, it was a disaster. Like, it was the whole night was just this grind that
mhm.
nobody enjoyed. It was a miracle we played a game after that. In that, like, seriously.
Well, happy you did.
Yeah, I'm glad we did. Um, so that was really rough.
Yeah, no, that's crazy.
Um, what was another good mistake? A mistake that actually I'll tell a new mistake because the
Yeah.
one I was going to say I think the listeners of Roleplay Chat have already heard. This mistake happened last week. We
Mhm,
were playing a game in my, like, at my place, my home game that I've been
mhm.
running now for quite some time, with my neighbors. And my wife, who's a player in the game, decided that she wanted to do something almost to frustrate me on purpose. Like,
Yeah, yeah,
sometimes
yeah.
she does
I
these
got.
things where it's like
I
she's
play
doing
with
it,
siblings. I get it.
she's doing it to bug me, but also like it's what she wants to do. It's
Yeah,
her
yeah.
fun. So she wanted to do this. She wanted to basically cast Dimension Door
Hmm.
to like, but not to go in the Dimension Door, but to like use the rope of the Dimension Door as like a climbing tool.
Okay, yeah,
Which I was like, okay, fine, you can get over the thing that I purposely put here to like stop you from getting to where you're
yeah,
like, whatever. You found a loophole, good for you.
yeah.
But then when she got to the top, she saw something on the other side that
Hmm.
she was trying to react to. And I was being kind of bitter. I hate to admit it, but I was being kind of bitter that I'm like,
Yeah.
you already got over the thing that I wasn't really expecting you to get over.
Hmm.
And now you're going to do this other thing that's going to stop like a critical element of what I need the bad guys to
Uh,
do right now. If
uh-huh.
you do this, like the game's done. Like there's no more conflict for you to resolve. Let's meet up next time. Like I can't
Hmm.
come up with something
Hmm.
fast enough. So anyway, I got kind of defensive and sort of like in your scenario, Willow, I just shot her down. And
Yeah.
I was kind of mean. I shouldn't have been so mean. I was like, "No, you can't do that. Like that's not how that spell works."
Hmm.
End of story. Like,
Hmm.
it's not even a conversation. I mean, I might have said it nicer than that, but
Yeah.
anyway, I was like, "Nope, you're not gonna be able to do it. You don't have time to do it." I came up with some excuse that
Hmm.
like everybody at the table, including me, after I said it, was like, that's a bad excuse." Like this.
Yeah.
So anyway, it felt bad coming out of my mouth. I
Hmm.
could tell that I had deflated what my wife was trying to do,
Hmm.
and I kind of ruined the game for her. Like
Hmm.
the rest of the night, she was like, "Meh." Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
thanks, Matt. Like, you kind of, I guess I'm not gonna do anything else, that
Hmm.
kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
it felt bad. Um, and anyway, I'm not gonna try to solve that problem
Yeah.
right now. But yeah, that happened, and it was not fun. And like, I
Yeah.
realized it was a mistake. Um, and it's funny how it's usually the people that you're closest to that like you allow yourself to do this kind of
Yep.
behavior with,
Hmm.
because I like to consider myself to be a game master who's very welcoming of ideas and like
Hmm. Same.
try whatever you want. Like, let's go. It's gonna be fun. I'm
Hmm.
gonna do my best to improvise.
But like I think the best thing though is that the best thing to say is that we are just humans, we're
Yeah.
humans and we're people and we make mistakes naturally and we have bad days and we have bad reactions and stuff happens, especially in
Hmm.
games like that, knowing that she's like trying to get under your skin and all of that and just kind of even the build up there of like then wanting to shut the idea down. Like, yeah, even though that still feels bad to do and that was a mistake and you regret doing it, I think there is just that point of acknowledging we're people. No,
Yeah.
we're people who have bad days, who have off days, and that doesn't excuse if you did anything negative to someone. That doesn't excuse their feelings on it, but it's at least you are still a person, and
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I think that's ultimately a lot of the mistakes that I've made in my games has ultimately been that, it was a bad day, it was an off day, that day was already it felt intense for me already, it felt heavy on having to, like,
Hmm.
run this game, and so, it just escalated even further as we were playing the game, and, everyone else was starting to feel things, and it's rough, it really is, so I think there is that caveat of we are people.
That's a good
Mistakes are
caveat.
just
Yeah.
naturally going to happen. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't be improving on them and being aware of what's happening. It's just you can give yourself some grace.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And we didn't fight about it for long. Like
Yeah.
I immediately realized that what I had done was
Mhm.
basically unacceptable out of a game
Yep.
master. Um, and I apologized live, like before the
Yep.
night was done.
Yep.
Um, and I think like you're saying, Willow, like totally we have to allow ourselves to make mistakes. We
Mhm.
have to forgive ourselves for making mistakes. And
Mhm.
I think we need to acknowledge them quickly. Because
Yes,
if you let a
absolutely.
mistake fester I think in all parts of our life, but let's just reserve ourselves to role
Yeah, let's
playing
let's
games.
just keep it.
Um,
This is still good real life advice.
it
No.
is, yeah, yeah. But I think acknowledging them and bringing them forward to your table
Mhm.
quickly is best, because if you let them
Absolutely.
fester for too long, depending on the kind of mistake, like
Yeah.
there are maybe mistakes that only you noticed.
Mhm.
And perhaps we can save that for later. But like
Yeah.
those exist too. But in the context of like these big bad ugly mistakes, you gotta say something
Yeah.
quickly. Uh,
I agree. I
yeah.
mean, I've even in so another mistake that I did have in a game was that same D&D game. Earlier on when they were in this city before they were going to this party, everyone decided that they wanted to do some, jobs. Like they wanted to do some jobs to make some money. First mistake is that I offered more than one job and then they decided, "Hey, we have the time to do all three." I'm like, I didn't want to I didn't want to do all three, but okay, I guess. So first mistake was that. But the big mistake though was one of the jobs ended up being this heist. They had to go steal this book for someone from this rich guy who was holding it in his house and whatever.
Mm.
And I'll be honest, at that point I wasn't very comfortable running heist type games. I didn't know exactly what I was doing, so trying to structure this was already a little stressful to me. Um, and so we come to the game and we start playing through. And, I designed some puzzles and some fun trap type things for the heist to make it a little bit more interesting. So I did some that I just made up. I did some that I, looked up some fun trap ideas. And my players were breezing through all these puzzles and stuff. And I think one of them even mentioned how like the one that I like solely created was like easy. I'm like,
Mm.
so at that point, I'm like, man, that sucks. Just to hear
Yeah.
in general. But then they get to a point where they find where the book is, and they like get locked in the room, or the entrance closes, and water starts to come out. There's like these holes at the top, and
Oh my
basically the
gosh.
room's gonna flood.
I did something like this
Yeah.
too.
But the problem is that what ended up happening is there was a miscommunication and a mistake that I made in how I was describing it. They thought it was way more urgent than it was. There was
Mm.
water coming in and it was filling up quickly, but it wasn't like you have 3 seconds or this whole room's going to be filled with water. And that's kind of how everyone else was thinking. And so they just start like everyone at the same time just starts trying to find ways and figure out how to do this, and like they're getting mad at each other because they're not able to get each of their
Oh
ideas
no.
across, and it's like it was so extremely
Mm.
overwhelming to even just be listening to, and like me, I'm just sitting here like what just happened? What went wrong? And what I ended up doing was stepping back. I'm like, "Okay, guys, hold on. Pause. Let me go back and re-describe this. Let me clarify exactly what is going on here so that whatever is happening can settle down. Because it was just getting way too intense for what it was.
Yeah.
So I took the step back. I'm like, all right, water's coming in. It is not the most immediate threat right now. There are people who are outside. There is water coming in here. So if you stay in here long enough, it's going to flood, but you don't all have to be trying to basically fight to be getting out of this place and getting upset at each other, because that's almost what was happening. Everyone was
Yeah.
getting
Oh no.
upset, and it was a specific player that was mostly getting upset that I'll probably mention in this as well, since there's some mistake stuff regarding that. Um, but I think like what you said of acknowledging mistakes. That was a point where I acknowledged
Yeah.
something went wrong. A mistake was made, something went wrong. I need to step back and be honest to the entire group right now of exactly what's happening so that we can move forward in the story. We can continue and have a good time, because that's why we're playing this game. We want to have a good time. And though that game traumatized me from wanting to run a heist for a while,
Oh
because
no.
it's
Yeah. Yeah.
like
Yeah. Yeah.
we even like joked that session didn't even exist. Like, you
Yeah.
guys got
Bye.
some
It's
money. Yeah,
done.
you
Yeah.
got some money randomly. Exactly how? Who knows?
That's
But it
funny.
was it was just a really odd time. But that was, you know, I know for myself, I've had troubles with describing. And so I've had a few mistakes where my descriptions ended up making a miscommunication like
Mm.
that.
That's
And
that's the tricky thing about this game, right?
yeah.
Like all role-playing games, for the most part, are gonna have some component where the
Mm,
game master is trying to illustrate what's in their head to
yep.
everybody else.
Yep.
And there's always gonna be some kind of failure to communicate. Like
Mhm.
there's always such a prime opportunity for an error to occur in that particular instance. Um, but I think we've covered quite a few different kinds of mistakes that could happen, I think, unintentionally. I mean,
Yeah,
mistakes
absolutely.
probably always happen unintentionally to a certain
Mhm.
degree, but I would like to talk to you a little bit, Willow, about mistakes that can happen in a more controlled environment. Because
Mhm.
I think when we're a game master and we're trying to be introspective, we can also set ourselves up to try new things in a more controlled space
Yeah.
that allow us to grow and
Mhm.
might risk a mistake
Yeah.
because we're trying something new. Um, but we can't grow without trying new things, I think,
Absolutely.
as a
Yeah.
game master. So I'd like to ask you if there's been instances like this where you've maybe, knowing a weakness that you might have,
Mhm.
willingly challenge yourself to like maybe run another heist game because you had
Yeah.
such a hard time with the first one.
I actually did do that.
Yeah, so going into that more controlled space, how
Mhm.
did you feel? Did you make mistakes, and how did you feel about those mistakes?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I'll use the heist game as a good example there. Later on, I decided to run a simplified version of Blades, called World of Blades,
Cool, yeah.
for for a different group. By different, I mean one person was different. It was my siblings and one other person. Um, but I was really nervous about that game. It was scary to come back to a heist game, especially after that, and just feeling like I didn't want to make that mistake. But I wanted to challenge myself. I wanted to be like, okay, I want to attempt this again, and I want
Mhm.
to make sure that we can do this. And so what I took away from it was a lot of just simplifying the way that the heist was and not taking it as seriously. Because I think I was taking that other heist a little too seriously. And so when things just kind of got a bit chaotic, like
Yeah.
it felt like things were going wrong there. And so I'm like, we're playing this one shot. Let's just play around and see what happened. And so it was both learning new mechanics and trying this thing. And there were some points where I definitely made some mistakes regarding the mechanics on and how things worked. That happens anytime you try a new system. It's going to happen. That's a great way of a controlled mistake. You're trying a new
Mhm.
game, you're going to make a mistake in a mechanic, guaranteed, and that's okay. Um, but then the actual game itself went really, really well. There was another similar moment though where it wasn't even a miscommunication. I'm still not quite sure what happened. One of the characters basically wanted to blow up a bomb in like a small room where everyone was there. And I'm like, Danny,
What is it about heist games and bombs? I
I
always
don't
have
know.
somebody who wants to blow something up, and I'm like, "Look, I get it, but you're being sneaky."
Yeah, I'm like, you are all going to explode. You are going to explode every single person, including you and your friends right now. And he's like, oh, that's fine. I'm like, let me reiterate that. You are going to kill everyone.
Yeah, yeah, oh
Like
my
it
gosh.
I but in that scenario, it was just more funny. Like, it was more of a funny misunderstanding whatever like, I still don't know if it was a misunderstanding what I said or if it was just bomb go boom. I I don't
Yeah.
know, but,
In a one shot,
um
it's so hard to, like,
it is.
there's no consequences to
It
doing that.
is, yes. But it went so much better because I did take some of those lessons I that happened in that last game. I tried to be more loose on the way I was structuring it. I made it more simple. I wasn't trying to I already had a little bit of feelings when I was in that other game on, you know, the expectations of it and not wanting to do all these jobs, and this one was the last one, and so there was some of
Mhm.
that there. Um but I definitely learned from it. because I was able to take it more easy, and it was a fantastic game, and I was trying to be more clear in my descriptions there too, because I knew that was a miscommunication last time. And so I was very I was very specific, in the way that I was saying things, and I even made a mistake in that game of, there was a twist in the game that I think was a little bit redundant. But,
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
know
yeah,
that
yeah.
now, and I played another one shot after that, and I tried something different, and that worked. So, I it's all about just, again, acknowledging and trying things again and growing from there. So, yeah. It it
Yeah.
it was interesting. I felt good about that game, and I felt good about what I took away from it and what I learned. And the fact that I did have kind of a bit of a problem player that was in the last one that caused most of the havoc, of the last scenario, and the other game didn't have that person, and it did go a lot smoother. But I don't know if there was a connection of, it went smoother because of that. I also just came in with a different mentality, so.
Yeah. I think that's the kind of thing that we can control. We can
Mhm,
control how we go in to it. I really like this idea too of like you're saying, like you knew what kind of didn't work
mhm,
well the first time, so you tried to bring solutions to those things
yep,
to hopefully prevent the mistake from happening again. I think that's a really great way to learn from our mistakes and to learn from failure.
mhm.
Um, I don't think we have to be like people listening don't have to be so scientific about it. Like
Oh, for sure.
but I think there's definitely something to be learned there.
Mhm.
An approach that I like to take to control my failure, if that makes sense, is to almost like microdose my failure, if that makes any kind
Mhm.
of sense.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Where like every time I'm running a game, if I have the bandwidth to challenge myself, so it's
Mhm.
not all the time, but if I have the bandwidth to challenge myself, I'm there's gonna be something that I'm gonna try to work towards.
Yeah.
One thing that I really wanted to work towards was becoming a better improvised game master.
Yeah.
So the past year, the games that I've been running have been virtually no prep. Like maybe
Awesome.
10 minutes of prep before the
Mhm.
game starts. And then we see what happens. Like we see where the game goes and that's it. And that was a struggle for me.
Yeah.
Um, but the way that I tried to microdose that was instead of just like cut cold turkey cutting preparation out of my game, I would like take it in strides. So like
Mhm.
maybe this faction is going to be completely improvised.
Yeah.
Or maybe this city, when they arrive to this city, all I'm going to have is a map.
Mhm.
That's it. And then I'll figure out the rest as I go. Or so
Yeah.
taking small chunks at a time to work up towards
Mhm.
starting a game tomorrow with 10 minutes of preparation, like, I feel comfortable doing that now. I would have probably had a panic attack had you told me I would have to do that, like, 2, 3 years
I
ago.
still
So,
feel like I could have a panic attack with that.
yeah, so anyway, so it's taking small steps that you know are in the direction of what you're trying to achieve,
Mhm.
and being honest with yourself. Like, if
Yeah.
you muck it up, that's okay. Like,
Yeah.
I think that that's a really is a solid way to learn from our failures, to
Absolutely.
go into it expecting something to go wrong or going into it like with this little micro challenge
Mhm.
that if that doesn't happen the way you expected it to, it's okay.
Yeah.
You can go back to the drawing board.
Absolutely. I mean, I even was doing that with my descriptions, when I started my Monster of the Week game, which overlapped a little bit with the end of the D&D game.
Mm,
I was A goal I had with Monster of the Week game was to challenge myself just a little bit more. I wanted to challenge myself in describing things a little bit more
mhm,
clearly. I wanted to challenge myself in describing things and paint more of a picture in everyone's heads. And so I actually think that's a really good strategy in doing it, letting it be something you work up to, especially if it's a
mhm.
more overall skill. If you're like, hey, I really want to get better at heists, I'm not sure how much you can microdose heists without running like just a full heist game, which then
Yeah,
means
that's
you're
true.
fully doing that. But um but at the
But
same
maybe
time,
maybe don't start, like, writing your own heist,
yeah,
like,
exactly,
go
right?
find a mystery game or go find a heist game or play Blade
Exactly.
like you did
Yeah.
playing Blades in the Dark. Like, find a system that'll support you in
Exactly.
doing the thing that you're trying to do.
And
Totally.
I'll say, yeah, running things that are written, I've only run like 2 pre-written things so far in all of like my TTRPG
Mm.
like game running. Um and I kind of regret not doing that more, especially at the beginning, because it is a lot to take on immediately of like, okay, I'm going to design everything myself and I have full control. And then yeah, you
Yeah.
deal with the mistakes later on and that's okay. Um but I really love pre-written stuff. I recently Land of Eam has been a game I've loved, Muppets combined with Lord of the Rings, it's beautiful, it makes me happy. I've been dying to play that game, and I was going through the thought process of like, "Okay, what could I write for this?" And I'm like, actually, I'm not gonna write for it. I'm gonna
Mhm.
use the quick start. I'm gonna use whatever adventure is in the quick start, and I'm just going to run that, and I'm gonna make my life simpler without, like, giving me extra work, and we're just gonna see how it goes. And I think that was a wonderful decision because I went into that game and immediately the vibes were correct, you know? I'm running
Mhm.
something that was already written for this, and so we're already having just a really silly, goofy time, this chicken foot witch and, muskrat that talks and things like that, so
That's
it's
awesome.
already really goofy. But I feel more confident to go to write something in Land of Eam now that I've run something that already had those vibes. And I sort of wish that I did do that for that Blades game. And I did print out some pre-done scenarios for it, but I decided to be a problem to myself and just write something. I'm like, I just want to write it,
Yeah.
it'll be
I mean,
fine.
Blades games are tricky because they're almost meant to not be planned. Like,
Yeah.
they're tricky in I found preparing for them, you almost have to, like, come with all kinds of options and then just see
hmm
where the cookie crumbles.
And that's sort of, with it being a one shot, there was, we only had so much time. It was only gonna be one
Yeah.
game, so I think a little bit more structure wasn't the end of the world.
Yeah, that's
We
true.
were only in this area. We knew immediately who you were going after and what you needed to do. Uh, but I would agree with that, and that's actually something that I got a little nervous with some of the pre-written Blade scenarios, is the fact that it did have, like, a lot of different options for even, like, who kind of the more antagonistic character
Yeah.
would have been and exactly what they were finding. But at the same time, that's perfectly okay. It just made me nervous at the time because it was something new.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's tricky, but new things are an opportunity to learn, an opportunity to fail.
Absolutely.
Um, so I'm thinking, Willow, I'm looking at the clock, and I want to
Yes.
have time to talk about player failure too. So maybe any last words on game master failure before we shift into we trade our hats in for a
Yeah,
different one.
absolutely. I think the maybe the last thing that I'll say is specifically on the subject of trying new games, and, I run a whole podcast where I talk to people on how to play these games and, like, all the
Mhm.
rules and stuff with them, and I love the rules and I love reading through these books. But I've made so many mistakes in the new TTRPGs I've tried where I've upright ignored rules. I just forgot to use them. I didn't use them correctly, or, any other variation of that.
Yeah.
And that's completely okay too, because that's also part of the learning process. And a lot of people are afraid of trying new games for that purpose of like, I don't want to make a mistake in it. But part of it is like those mistakes are fun. Those mistakes are you learning that game. Okay, you did this wrong in Blades in the Dark. You can come back next time and you can
Yeah.
fix that mistake if you want to even. Maybe the way that you did it originally was fun for you and that's okay too. So, I think that's like kind of my last closing thought is that specifically with trying new TTRPGs, don't be afraid of making mistakes in them.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid of that because it will
The
be okay.
Totally. Yeah, echo that 100%, and I'll share a small anecdote. The first time I ran Blades in the Dark, I misinterpreted the engagement role rule. The
Oh,
the engagement role is this thing that the game master does when the players start their heist,
yeah.
basically. Like, they start whatever mission they're about to do, you There's a bunch of modifiers, but effectively you roll some dice, and that sets the tone
Mhm.
for that first encounter.
Mhm.
I thought it set the tone for the whole game. So the first time we played, I rolled the dice, and I was like, you guys gotta, like, there was all twos and ones and stuff,
Mhm.
and I was like, well, you guys
This
are,
is gonna suck.
you're just gonna suck all night. And they were like, this is dumb. Like, what a stupid game.
That would be a terrible design. I mean,
Yeah,
like, I
yeah.
I'm sure there's people that would maybe enjoy that, but yeah, that's a funny way to do
I mean,
that's
I
a
don't know. I didn't think to question it.
yeah,
And
and
then
it's a
I
new
I like
rule, you don't
30
know what you're
minutes,
doing.
yeah, and 30 minutes into the game, I was like, "You know what? Too bad what the engagement rule said. We're gonna ignore that because it's not doesn't make sense for it to, like, affect the whole game."
Yeah,
Yeah, it doesn't. I misinterpreted
and
it.
then
I
and that's how it
misinterpreted
actually
it. Yeah. Anyways.
I love that. I mean, I've made mistakes in my Monster of the Week game where I didn't call for roles that were so clear. Like, they were right there, and I'm like, "Oh, yeah, we'll just describe and role play our way through it," and then, like, afterwards, I'm like, "Why didn't I have them roll for that? What? What? There's we wanna roll dice, come on."
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, but I agree with you 1,000,000%. You're gonna make mistakes learning new games, totally, and I think you have to allow yourself to make those mistakes.
Yes.
And you're not gonna see actual plays do those things because they'll edit the mistakes out. So, like, don't feel like you're the only one doing them. They're doing the mistakes too. They just
Yeah,
don't publish that content.
exactly.
Anyway, okay, now we're players.
Now we're
We're
players. Player cap, yep.
player cap is on. We're going to a table, we're playing games with our friends. There's maybe a little less of that pressure that the game master has, right?
Mhm,
To host the game and to be the arbiter of the
mhm.
rules and all of that stuff. But I think players can make mistakes too. Uh,
Absolutely.
yeah, there's definitely opportunity for them to make mistakes, opportunities for them to learn from those mistakes. So
Mhm.
maybe I'll pass the microphone back over to you, Willow, and ask you if you've made mistakes as a player, if there's mistakes that you've made as a player that, like, you recall.
Yeah, this one's a bit trickier
It's a bit
because
trickier, yeah.
yeah, because as a GM, every single mistake, you're analyzing immediately like, "Oh, no." But as
Yeah.
a player, it is a little trickier. I wouldn't say it's a mistake, but, I struggled with role playing for a while, and I was in some games where that was a pretty heavy element of the game. And that was
Yeah.
that not a mistake, but that's something as a player that I definitely struggled with
Yeah.
for a
Maybe you
little bit.
reflected on.
Yeah,
Yeah. Maybe I'll
and
maybe I'll throw one in the hat, and then
yeah.
maybe that'll inspire you. So a mistake that I made, this was a while ago now. This was probably 4 or 5 years ago, and
Mhm,
I don't know if it's the biggest regret I've ever had in a role-playing game, but it's one of them for
mm,
sure. Um, Basically, there was a player at our table who's one of my very close friends
mhm,
who driving with the rest because we were like taking the game. I think too in retro, we were taking the game too seriously. Like, we wanted to
mhm.
show up and be in character, and we thought we were like super cool. And he was coming to the game for a social reason.
Yeah.
Um, he wanted to meet with his friends. He wanted to spend a Friday
Mhm.
night with his friends. And you know what? That's a perfectly valid way to play the game.
Absolutely.
But the rest of us wanted to play a different game.
Mhm.
And so we basically kicked him out. We were like, "Hey, man,
Oh,
we don't want to
no.
play with you anymore." And we had that conversation. And I mean, maybe it was not just my mistake, but I felt bad. Like, this is one of my
Mhm.
closest friends. I'm telling him he can't come play with us, but I was just so in my own head that, like, we're playing this game and we're super
Yep, yep.
serious and, like, we are here for the story. But then like, when you look back on that moment, to me it was a mistake because
Mhm.
he was still somebody that was bringing something to the table.
Yeah.
And yes, there were some there was some friction in the kind of actions that he had done in the game that created like negative consequences because maybe he didn't fully think them through. But I don't know, I felt like we were too harsh to just be
Yeah.
like, "Ah, get out of here." Like, we didn't say that, but like, we just cut him out, and
Mhm.
it felt like that could have been taken care of in a different way. We could have
Yeah.
given him constructive feedback. We could have found maybe a different character for him to play that would have leaned less on his
Mhm.
impulses. I don't know. I don't really know how to solve this problem. I think
Yeah.
drama between party members of a table and stuff is always going to be something that
Yeah.
happens.
It
But
does.
in this particular case, I felt like it was a mistake to just
Mhm.
cut him out. Um, and we have since brought him back to play.
Mhm.
But to me, that was a player decision. I mean, it was a table decision that we made, I think, too swiftly, and it was like too severe of a consequence. I don't know.
Mhm.
I don't know if I'm making sense, but to me,
Yeah,
that
no,
was
no.
something
No,
that.
I think that's completely fair 'cause it is that moment where it's like, play style, I wanna play this type of game and, there's someone who's maybe I I don't know if I wanna say it like that, 'cause I don't think it's a negative thing, the fact that there is a different style of play.
Mhm,
But yeah, there are those times where you do make a decision like that quickly and you do regret it. And like, it could have handled that with more grace. And I know for me, a lot of the times where I've come to conflicts like that, I'll do like session like zero point 0.5 or something like that, where it's like basically a sit down session. Like, all right,
yeah,
guys, we're going to talk about what has been happening, talk about the game, and, make sure everyone's on the same page and basically run through stuff like that. And how I use those is to specifically talk about that. How you were mentioning,
mhm,
like, it would have been better to be able to talk about it and not just make that decision and then it happened. Have that space where everyone can discuss. And I don't know if that's really a solution to the problem, but that's at least something that I've done in the past to try
yeah,
and
totally.
not fall into that. Though at the same time I can see where there can be some justification in kicking someone out of the game quick like that if they are someone causing problems. I very, very, very recently and in all those games that I was playing, I had a friend that played. And I kept that friend in these games much longer than I should have.
Mm,
And it was both like, a detriment to the game and stuff that was happening was affecting the game, affecting the other players, affecting me. And I almost wish I had that moment of just being able to kick them out and be able
mhm,
to do that. But at the same time, instead I did those check-in sessions. And we would check in every single time and we would resolve the issues, but then it would just come back up. And I think that's
I
where you
see.
just use your own judgment in that situation. If it keeps coming up, I think then it's something where it's like you have to leave the game because it
Yeah,
keeps being the same types of things.
and I think it's a matter of weighing to like, every situation will be different, right?
Yeah. Cuz it's
Like,
social too. Like
yeah,
there's just so much there.
but sometimes there's behavior that is totally unacceptable, and the person
Mhm.
needs to be gone because they
Mhm.
say something that is extremely hurtful to like
Yep.
another person at the table
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
something, like that's not acceptable. And that wasn't the case
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
in my situation at all.
Yeah.
He was just playing the game the way he wanted to be playing the game,
Mhm.
and the rest of us had a different perspective on the way we wanted to play the game.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we were just a group of buddies playing games. Like,
Mhm.
anyway, it left a bad taste in my mouth
Yeah,
for a
no.
long time.
I
Um,
totally get that. Yeah,
yeah,
for
it's
me,
not.
I don't know if I've had any big player mistake moments like that. I've had times where I've made, rash decisions as a character in the moment
Mm.
that, I once shot a raven in Cursus Strahd and everyone was so upset. Like I was like, "Oh, wait, aren't we like supposed to kill this raven?" And I shot it and everyone was like, "Why did you do that?" I'm like, "I'm sorry. I don't know what I'm doing." Especially like it was like one of the first sessions of that game of like the very first campaign I ever played, so I'm like,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I thought I was okay, but all right. I've had I guess this is sort of a mistake. In a private game that I was playing with someone, my character ended up developing a close relationship with someone and kind of getting into a relationship with an NPC. And there was a point in that game where we were going to be leaving the city that we were in.
Mm.
And I didn't tell that NPC that we were leaving until like very last minute. Cause it I just didn't
Yeah,
even
there's a
think
lot of
about it.
stuff going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there ended up being, like, a lot of, like, game repercussions from that of, like, the
Mm,
NPC being, like, super upset at me and things like that, and I'm like, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean to do this, like, oh gosh."
I
And,
know.
like, I go back and forth because it's like, yeah, as a character, I decided to have that relationship. As a character, I decided to have that connection, and that was a responsibility I had as a character. And so I feel like that was a mistake because I wish I could have followed up on those types of things much better, and I was able to keep track of that. But also, I'm like, this was like one of my first campaigns at the same
Yeah.
time, and I didn't
Yeah,
know what
don't
I was.
punish me for this, please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that was interesting. And that same game, um, I I I made a mistake of building a character that did not fit with the themes of the game. I wasn't
I think that's an important one, actually,
Yeah,
because
I
you
wasn't
wanna.
told the themes though.
Yeah, that's
In
fair.
that way of like, so I had a character that had a lot of cold and necromancy magic type things. So like cold necrotic damage was a lot of stuff that I could do. We
Mhm.
fought a lot of devils. And
Mm.
so those were my main attacks and spells and things like that. And so there was a lot of times during those fights where I would use one of those because that was like one of the only things I could do. And people are like, wait, that doesn't do anything. I'm like, um, then I hit it with my sword, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Oh, that's not fun. Yeah,
Yeah,
but I
no.
think having a character who is intertwined in what's happening
Yes.
is as much your responsibility as it is the game master's when you're
Absolutely.
playing in a game. And I think a really easy way to make that happen is to just not figure it all out. Like make your
Yes.
character and be like, "Yeah, I'm from I don't know where. And but my motivations are this and that." And like
Mhm. Mhm.
have like almost like piece of Swiss cheese as a backstory. Because
No,
then
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
as stuff comes up, you can be like, "Oh, this new village that's being raided by, goblins or whatever,
Mhm.
my brother came to protect this village and he's gone now."
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then
yeah.
tell the game master, and now you have a perfectly valid reason to want to go chase after the goblins.
I
Like,
mean, I've definitely made the mistake of just writing too thorough of a backstory beforehand because I was just
y
having fun with it, and then realizing like, "Oh, no, I have no wiggle room." As a character, especially, it's like, "Oh, yeah, we can adjust this on the fly." Like, I was at least open to like, I'm okay with changing any of this because
yeah, yeah,
I'm not
yeah.
married to all of these ideas. But no, I agree, and I haven't had this happen from a player perspective as much as I've had this from a GM perspective. Because that's another thing that went wrong in my initial D&D game that I ran, is that
Mm,
we didn't have that session 0 set expectations for at least what kind of game that we wanted to do. The game
yeah,
ideas shifted around a little bit, and like one of the two of the characters made pretty, pretty structured backstories that didn't necessarily have to do with what we were doing.
yeah, with about anything.
Yeah, and well, one of them was even changed out last minute a week before we played and was a whole completely different story I wasn't even prepared for. I'm
Mm,
like, "Oh," and that's what made my life a lot harder with then having to tie in all of those narratives.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
It's a lot to deal with when you have, like, 4 conflicting stories that don't
yeah,
connect in any way. So absolutely leave holes in your backstory, leave questions, leave things that you can figure out later on. And it just makes everyone's life more easier because you then can insert yourself in that story so much better.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned something else there, Willow, that I think is something that uh, I often do as a player, and I consider it to be something that I strive to stop doing.
Mhm.
Is I get in the way of my own fun. And I
Mhm.
would consider that to be a mistake that I make as a
Yeah.
player. Is that sometimes there'll be a scenario that's happening, and I go to like the logical thing, like, oh, let's do the logical thing
Mhm.
to avoid whatever kind of consequences might
Mhm.
occur. And that's a logical thing to want to do in a game, like to
Yeah.
try to get the best possible outcome. But we can't forget that we're here to tell a story, and sometimes the fun part of the story is to do a daring thing and to take big risks. And
Yeah,
like,
do
yeah,
something silly.
do something wild and silly and like memorable.
Mhm.
So I think that as a player, that could be something that I can make a mistake in, is
Yeah.
like, you know what? Make a decision
Yep.
or take a risk
Yep.
that's gonna possibly blow up in my face. But that's
Mhm.
okay. And as long as everybody's on the same page and you're not constantly being too ridiculous,
Yeah.
you're taking turns sharing that spotlight, then that can
Yeah.
be a lot of fun.
I
Um,
find myself, from kind of similar thing in that of like I find myself holding myself back
mhm.
character-wise and making decisions and doing things that I think would be fun because I don't wanna step on other people's toes, like, as a character, and in turn, that has prevented some of my own fun from happening.
Yeah.
You know, slight example, this I mean, I did it a little bit here, and, I played a game on an actual play, Paranormal Inc. on Game
Cool.
Master Monday. Very good session. I love that game, very fun. Um, but what ended up happening is I didn't really I didn't take action in some of these points. So I was the only person who wasn't able to do this really fun thing where you bring in like an element of your backstory and explain like some trauma of your character and flesh them out
Mhm.
even more. I was the only player that didn't do that in that entire game. Everyone else did it. And I am by no means upset at everyone else because they were just playing the game. I
Nice.
just was kind of getting in my own way on stuff. I didn't let those opportunities happen. So then, I loved the game. I had so much fun, but then there was that little bit of like, oh, I kind of wish that I did something for Andy, and I reflected on one of these things and got kind of a spotlight moment like that. So that's something I have a hard time with as a player, and definitely a mistake that I make is because I don't want to be too much and
Yeah.
get in the way of everyone
It's
else.
tricky. It's a tricky balance.
It is.
Yeah. But I think as a player, just as we were saying as a game master, you can like microdose on this kind of stuff,
Mhm.
right? You can do small failures. If you're trying to practice voices, you're trying to practice accents, you're trying to
Yep.
practice
Being a
having
little bit more assertive.
yeah, you know what? When you go to your next game, this is a task for whoever's listening. At your next game where you are a player or a game master,
Mhm.
give yourself a mission. Give yourself something that you want to try to do that you
I
know
love
is
it.
something that you're not very good at. And
I wanna
give
do this
yourself,
for
yeah,
every game now. Yeah.
just, and I mean, don't put too much pressure on yourself. Don't say, like, oh,
Mhm.
Matt and Willow
Yeah,
forced me to
yeah.
do this. Like, make sure
I
you have
know.
the right bandwidth to do it.
Yeah, yeah.
But assuming that you have that bandwidth, go in and be more assertive. Make your fun happen, or go in and practice a cool new posture for an
Mhm.
NPC because it might make a cool voice come out that you didn't think you could do, um, or whatever.
I
Uh,
love it. No,
um,
I think that's great, and yeah, absolute I think that is something definitely no pressure on doing that, but I know for myself, I've definitely wanted to challenge myself, and I don't always think of ways to do it, but I think that's a great way to come at it. Like, okay, what's a small thing that I could challenge myself slightly in this game? With that Land of Veem game, it was doing a bunch of wacky voices. I did a really terrible voice for a toad, but I did it,
but you did
That's
it. That's
that's
it.
the thing.
Yeah, and you never know what voice is gonna be good. Like,
And what's
sometimes,
gonna come out all the time
yeah,
too.
yeah, you start talking and you're like, "Whoa, that's not something I wanna do again." Or you're like, "How do I do that voice? Like, it was so good,
Yeah.
like, I gotta get back into it."
You can't figure it out, and then you're just, like, thinking for the entire week leading up to that session, like, "Okay, how
Yeah,
did I do
yeah,
that? How
yeah,
did," and
yeah.
then, like, practicing slightly, then, like, not being able to get it, then you get to the game, it's like, "Bear with me.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
it'll be a voice. If it's not the same, I'm sorry," you know?
A few episodes ago, I mean, actually, I shouldn't say that because I don't know exactly where this is gonna release, but
Don't wanna date
it's
yourself.
yeah, at some point last year in late 2023, Adam Slemon from the Dungeon Run was on, and he
Mhm,
talked about, like, role-playing advice, and one thing that he said that I thought was super interesting was that a lot of your voice comes from, like, your physical body, like, proportion like, how you are positioned.
mhm,
So, if you even if you don't wanna make a bunch of wacky voices, if you, like, arch your back and talk with your chin in for a character, they're gonna sound different than if you're talking with your chin up and you're
yeah,
always looking like this. So, like, making those characters have
that's
a
actually really
physical
good.
manifestation
Mhm.
is an easy way to not forget how they talk because all you have to do is do that physical, like,
Yeah,
change your body position to make that voice happen. And then you're not straining your voice or you're
mhm.
not, like, you know, doing some silly thing that you can't replicate.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And
yeah.
even, like, I know that people have suggested even, like, just changing the way that you're speaking, like, using maybe different types of words and stuff like that for
Yeah,
different characters can be ways of even trying to
totally.
differentiate them, but actually posture is a really good. I'm gonna try that out 'cause I never even thought about that.
Yeah, I thought it was super cool. Um, but
It's so
anyway,
fun.
alright, so I think we've covered failure from both ends, as a
Yeah,
game master and as a
failure
player.
all around.
Failure and mistakes all around. Before we wrap stuff up though, Willow, I wanted to ask you something that I think I'm hoping is helpful for people to hear.
Mhm.
So listening to us talk about making mistakes, I think some of our stories might sound a bit scary. Like we might hopefully unintentionally though, like
Yeah,
I don't want to discourage people from making mistakes.
absolutely.
So if people listening are maybe a little bit worried about
Mhm.
making mistakes or worried about the repercussions of their mistakes, what kind of advice could you give people, or what kind of words of encouragement would you want to tell people so that they can go forth and make mistakes bravely and courageously without,
Absolutely, yeah.
yeah.
I think first off, it is okay. Even if it doesn't feel okay to you, it is genuinely okay. It is okay to make a mistake. Again, we are people. We are humans. We are imperfect beings. There is no way of getting around that. And most of the time, if you're playing with your friends, they're going to understand. They're going to understand if something happens. And I think my biggest piece of advice is communication. Like, any aspect of TTRPGs, I think, is always leads to just communication, you know?
Mhm.
But especially when it comes to mistakes, like Matt said, being upfront and kind of addressing mistakes as soon as you can, and being able to, let's say apologize, or even again, take accountability, like, yeah, that just happened, you know, we can continue to move on, or if you need to talk about it in that moment, talk about it in that moment. Have that communication with your group and be open, and yeah, make sure it is safe and make sure it is a place that you can get that support, because if you don't have a group that's going to provide that, it's going to make those mistakes a little bit harder. But it's still going to be okay. Even if other people may fight back on them, and I've had that in my games.
Mm.
It is still okay that you made that mistake because you are learning. You are always gonna be learning, you're always going to be moving forward, and, I made, like, one of the biggest mistakes I feel like in TTRPGs, railroading, but I've been able to move on from that, and, it felt bad for a long while, but everyone understood. when I told my players what happened and I told them the reasons behind why I did it, they completely understood. They were super accepting and understanding, and we were able to talk through it. And then we were able to move on. And just having that communication and keep moving forward because it is okay. I think
Yeah.
that's the biggest advice. It is okay, and just keep communicating with your party because that's always going to be the priority. If you communicate, then nothing bad, at least, will happen without you knowing. I think is the best way. Like bad things could still happen, but at least you're putting it all on the table instead of it being something that can fester.
Yeah, that's a really well said. I don't think there's much more for me to add, really. So totally. And try to
Yeah,
take control of it if you can,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
Like you were saying, communicate, be open, be honest, say this is something new.
Mhm.
Say that you might make a mistake.
Mhm.
Say it before the game starts.
Especially
Because
if you're, like, in a bad mental space too, because that's
yeah.
sometimes where there's been mistakes in my own game is where I'm
Hmm.
just having an off day. I say up front, like, "Hey, it's a bit of a weird day, so there may just be some stuff in this session that happens that, is gonna be a bit weird or could be a mistake." Just kind of getting that, again, on the
Yeah.
table.
Yeah. Or if you're trying something new,
Yeah.
be like if you've come up with one of these little challenges for yourself, say so. Be like,
Yeah.
"Hey, I'm trying to make travel different
Mhm.
by incorporating some new micro game.
Yeah.
Let's see how it works out. It might
Yeah.
not be super fun. Maybe it'll be the best thing ever.
Yeah. "Hey, we're
Let's see
doing a
what happens."
heist."
Yeah.
I've never done one.
Yeah.
And then
Exactly.
everyone and
Bear
then
with me.
everyone knows. Yeah, bear with me.
Yeah. Um, Speaking of preparing our table,
Yes.
I think we should also scoot on over into the VIP roleplay chat Patreon chat.
Hey.
So, for listeners of the show who aren't already part of that exclusive club, we'll have to see you later because Willow and I are gonna go into the black room, into the special VIP behind the red stanchions, into the VIP room to talk a little bit about prep. We'll see you. We'll
Rip.
see you in a bit.
Yeah.
So yeah, welcome everybody, and Willow, welcome.
Well, thank you.
So we're gonna change gears a little here, and talk about preparation.
Yeah.
Preparation as a game master, maybe as
Mhm.
a player if you want to, but
Yeah.
I think maybe I'll have one question for you on topic with
Mhm.
regards to failure, and then or failure and mistakes, and then maybe we'll just talk about preparation in general.
Okay.
But with all we've been saying about making mistakes and things like that, is there anything that you do in your game prep when you're trying to tackle something new, or when you're trying to revisit something that maybe you struggled with the first time around?
Yeah, so this is actually, I did do something along that exact lines very recently. So the Monster of the Week game that I was playing that not playing anymore, um, during the last arc of that game, I was making mistakes using the, like, mystery countdown system.
Mm,
I love the way that mechanic works. I adore it. It's been a while since I read the book at that point, and we had big breaks in between a lot of these sessions, and so I just misused it. That caused a little bit of, some disappointment in the game. But,
okay.
it happened and everyone understood that it was okay. But after that arc, and that was, like, when we finished up the arc was when that happened. Between that and my preparation for the next one, I sat down, opened up my Monster of the Week book again, and re-went over all of the stuff regarding the countdown and how to frame a mystery and all of those things because it's been like a year or maybe two since I last really read the book.
Mhm.
And so I just felt like I kind of needed a bit more of that structure. So yeah, I sat down. I even have hold on. I can the listeners won't be able to see, but I can show you. I have a whole like big like page that even has a back to it that was just me going over like how does mysteries work? in in Monster of the Week, and how do I use the countdown.
Yeah.
And so it was just doing that homework. And that's how I like even tackling doing new games is I will go over the book and I will, usually read through it sometimes before I even play the game. But then when I decide, hey, I'm going to play this, I reread the sections that I think are really important to me, which are usually around, designing the plot and any kind of adversaries or, things that they have to uh oh gosh, what is it called? It's
Like
obstacles and stuff like
obstacles.
that.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, I'll go through like all of those sections, and I'll just kind of do a little bit of homework. My prep for one shots is probably more than most people would do, but partly I do it because I try a bunch of new systems. So I just like trying to figure out the structure of how this story is going to work. And then I'll
Yeah.
have a whole section where my actual prep is, and it's usually much shorter and just like bullet points. But
Yeah.
I always have kind of that homework stage where I try and figure out, you know, this is how they recommend doing an encounter. And so I write that down and I try to work through like, okay, what would make then an interesting encounter? What can I do that ties in with the story that would make an interesting encounter? And I just kind of do a lot of yeah, it's just homework. Like, that's the best way
Yeah.
that I can think of saying it. It's fun homework for me, personally.
But I love how you go back to the source material
Yes,
because
all the
it's
time.
funny how often we forget to do that.
Mhm.
Like if there's a certain rule or there's a certain thing that you're not too sure, if you go back and just read the rules, most
It
of the
helps.
time it helps a significant amount. Like they'll give you explanations or there might be
Mhm.
examples or like text that you read but didn't fully understand
Or didn't
because
absorb,
you didn't
yeah.
absorb it right or you didn't know like going over it a second or third time really helps give you that context that you
It
needed.
does.
So yeah, that's fantastic advice.
Yeah,
Very well
I
said.
never did that with D&D, but I do it with all the other TTRPG games I play. Like, okay, I love reading TTRPG books. I've never read any of the D&D books. I've never read them. And even when I ran the game, I never even read through most of the DMG. Like I like big aspects of why that game failed. It makes sense because I didn't like read the book and actually like do some of the work that needed to be done. But at the same time, I'm like, I feel confident in this.
Yeah, yeah, that's usually all you need really.
Yeah.
um and speaking of that confidence, let's throw you another question that's like maybe a
Yeah.
little bit of a situation. Let's say you're on like a weekend trip with your friends.
Mhm.
You're renting like a cabin in the woods somewhere, and one of your friends at dinner, like you're having dinner, you're barbecuing stuff or whatever, and they say, "Hey, Willow, like you like role playing games, like you have a podcast about this stuff. Let's play a game. Like
Mhm.
after we're done doing the dishes, can you run a game for us?" And let's assume you say yes.
Mhm. My next question would be after dishes are done, right? Yeah, like
Yeah,
we're
yeah.
waiting, like
You've
trying to
got
gauge how much time.
let's say you've got like 15 minutes of downtime
Mhm.
to get yourself amped up and ready to play. What are you playing? What are you
Yeah,
thinking of in those 15 minutes? How do you prepare yourself and prepare this game in 15
absolutely.
minutes?
Well, I am a huge lover of one-shot systems and like real simple, like, 15-page systems, even stuff like that.
Cool.
So my immediate answer would be one of those. The game that I would run would probably be definitely Wizards, which is I don't know, I think it's like 15 pages. It may be less than that. Um, it's like a little zine RPG about pretending to be a wizard trying to pass a wizarding
Oh
exam.
my gosh, that's
It's
amazing.
it's so dumb, it's so silly, and the whole premise is just having, like, 4 chambers where there's just obstacles and puzzles that they have to solve using their which
That's
by
hilarious.
magic, it is you play as, like, a wrestler, and your magic is doing wrestling moves, and that's how you solve, like,
I love
problems
it.
and stuff like that. The character creation's super easy because it's literally, like They have a bunch of examples. I actually did play this with my group before, and the characters were a magician who like some back alley magician, um, vampire, and a collector of odd items. And it was a beautiful game. There was a point where the magician wanted to send a little fireball at this robot, but instead they pulled out a deck of cards, so they just shoved the cards into the robot until it short circuited. There's a time where they needed to like fly across the room, and the collector got like a little propeller hat out of his bag to like
That's
go
hilarious.
across. It,
Yeah.
it was so goofy, but that one because literally, they have rules. They have, like, roll tables in the game itself to just randomly generate some chambers, like, right off
Oh,
the bat.
cool.
So
That's
it
nice.
would like, super easy prep, that 100%. It's gonna be fun, it's gonna be goofy, it's gonna be easy to pick up, and I get to randomly roll some chambers, like, I am set.
Yeah, that's great. I love it. Great answer. And I've never heard of wizards before, so that's cool.
Yeah,
I'm
you
adding
should
that to my
definitely
list.
check it out. It's
That sounds
really
like a lot of fun.
It's so goofy. It's so goofy. It's like it's probably the one shot that we laughed the most about because the magician was named Scrimble Scales and would do a little jig and the
That's
player would do
great.
an actual like jig in real life. It was so goofy.
That's amazing. Amazing. All right, and now let's ask a different question that's
Yeah.
maybe less on the spot. Uh, so as far as your usual preparation goes,
Mhm.
and you were saying that like you can kind of teeter between a lot and very little, but I'd like to ask you, what's one tool or trick that you use that works really well for you and the way
Mhm.
that you prepare games?
That's a really good question. So there was there's two things. One is just like bullet point interesting scenes. Just kind of have like a I don't know, 2, 3 bullet points on a page of like, this would be an interesting scenario to happen. And just like that's how I like doing a bit more improv type games. Like, all right,
Mhm.
you know, this, and this would be interesting to bring up and has like, been brought up in a previous session, so it makes sense. But a tool that I've actually used, and I can't remember exactly who I got this from. I think it was someone on TikTok, I want to say, is a system of basically making a beginning, middle, and end. Like beginning, middle, and end for your prep.
Cool.
And I use this a little bit more for one shots now. But how basically it's for is like beginning of the game. How does it start off? What's the opening scene and how I interpret at least, what's the opening scene and what hooks them into whatever's going to be happening throughout the rest of the session.
Mhm.
Middle, I kind of always go back and forth on. That's usually where I just kind of put information for the game. Like I don't know what's gonna be happening in the middle, so here's my stat
Yeah.
blocks and the things that I want to know and, like, notes on any location and stuff they're going into. Um, or if there's gonna be, like, some sort of twist there. If there's gonna be a twist around the middle of the game that they're gonna find out, I'll, like, put that there. And
Cool.
then the end is kind of, this is where I like using it for one shots, is, like, kind of what's the goal? What ends the game? No, it ends the game when they get this when they, for example, my Blades game, the end was when they resolve the, bribe that this, other gang had. When they
Yeah, yeah.
resolve that, that's the end of the game. And so I've used that for both session prep and for one shots. I like using it for one shots, especially to just structure that beginning. And then I use that middle and end to give a little bit more structure since it is a smaller time frame. So I try and, keep things going. Like, so, midway through the game, we should be at this point. And so I'm kind of looking at that in my notes and being like, okay, I need to be directing it in that direction. Then end, this is what ends the game, and any kind of notes that happened there. In my session prep, normally I would use that in a way. I used it more for my D&D games and Monster of the Week. Beginning, how's the scene gonna begin? What are
Yeah.
we starting off with? And then I would make bullet points for kind of the middle part of just, like, interesting scenes, and then the end was kind of where my idea of where I wanted to end that session at. Since it was going to be a continuous thing, what's kind of
Hmm.
like a cliffhanger or a good end point that everyone's gonna be satisfied with? And so that's a tool that I've used quite a bit, for my prep. I think it's still evolving as I'm using it more and more and kind of still finding my exact style on how I GM games, but yeah, that's one I've enjoyed.
Nice. It almost reminds me. I feel like it's like a deck of cards called the deck of stories, maybe
I think
something
I
like
think I
this.
may have seen that advertised before.
It reminds me sort of what you're saying, where
Mhm.
there's like you shuffle this deck of cards and you pick 3 cards, and they have like it's got this 3 tiers. I don't know if it's exactly the same TikTok thing that you're talking about, but that
Yeah,
might be a
I don't think it was the same thing, but I think I've seen that before, and it does have that similar vibe.
yeah yeah. Anyway, might be worth checking out.
Yeah.
But that's cool. That's really awesome. I like that, especially in a one shot situation. Having those
Mhm.
3 acts, I
Yeah.
think is like
Yeah,
almost
acts.
mandatory.
That's a really good way of doing it, especially, like, that's a good way of, referring to it. Yeah, it's the acts of the story. It's the acts of
Yeah,
what we're doing in this, 3-hour session,
pretty much.
and,
Yeah.
it's always trying to figure out where to begin because you always wanna get to the point fast enough, and it's fun.
Yeah, oh yeah. Oh yeah, totally, totally. Well, cool. So thanks, Willow, and
Yeah,
welcome back everybody. We've returned from the VIP
from the secret chats.
Patreon room. Um so yeah, we're back and we're ready to kind of close the show out. So Willow, why don't you share any parting words you might have with the
Mhm.
listeners of Roleplay Chat with regards to making mistakes and failure. But then, of course, also please remind us of where people can find you on socials, where they can listen to the RPG Goblin, and any other things that you might want to share with the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. So, parting words, I wanna say I can tend to be a little harsh on myself with failures, so if any of that came across, it's not on failure and mistakes in general, it's just me being harsh on myself. So I just
You were a little
yeah.
harsh, and maybe I felt like I wanted to say this a number of times. That railroading thing, like stuff happens,
It
and
does, and
it's
like I said, I'm
nobody's
still
fault. Yeah,
working through that completely, but
but yeah, but it's not anybody's fault. You
absolutely.
you had a situation that happened, and
Mhm.
like railroading isn't actually the end of the world. Like, you know what? Like,
It is not,
you
truly.
didn't like yell at somebody, or you didn't
Yeah, I
call
didn't kill
anybody a bad
someone.
name, or yeah, and anyway, I
But
don't think you need
I
to.
do want to clear that up. I know that I can tend to be a bit harsh, and I just want to make sure harsh on myself. I would I know for sure if I was in a player situation and someone made that mistake, it would be completely okay. So I
Mhm,
just want to make sure that it's not anything on making the mistakes and the failure and stuff like that because that is okay and it is completely okay. I just know that's a mistake I still make. I'm harsh on myself about it, but, to bring it back around.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
well done.
but I do hope that this is at least helpful to, even just hear other people talk about it because I feel like you don't always hear that, you hear about problem players and problem situations that happen, but sometimes just being able as a GM to just express some of these feelings that you've had during a
Mhm,
game, that just can feel good and that can feel validating to hear that other people have those same struggles. That hey, you as a GM, you're not perfect. And seeing people that you maybe even look up to, they're also not perfect, and that's okay.
mhm,
So I hope that was helpful. And yeah, I do hope that you enjoyed this. And if you liked what I said at all and you like me talking a lot, I do that a lot on my show, the RPG Goblin. I talk a lot. We talk a lot about TTRPGs. We talk a lot about new systems outside of D&D 5e. So if you're looking to get introduced into some other really cool games that you may like more and that fit your play style or genres that you want to play, like, hey, you want to play Lovecraftian horror? Call of Cthulhu, it's right there. We did an episode on it. So yeah, we do just have really fun chats. We have an episode coming out with Matt
Yeah,
soon here about
can't
lasers
wait.
and feelings, which I'm really excited about. And I actually even did my own episode about making mistakes in TTRPGs too on my show,
Oh, cool.
which was definitely much different than this. And I had a guest on who did a lot more of that, of sharing his mistakes. And that's where I've kind of had the whole thing in my head of like, I want to talk about this kind of stuff and
Mhm.
make it more normalized. So yeah, you can check out the RPG Goblin on social media, on Threads at the RPG Goblin, TikTok at the RPG Goblin, technically Twitter as well. I mostly use Threads and TikTok, I'll be honest with you. So if you want to check out the show and what I'm doing and any TTRPG things I talk about, Threads or TikTok at the RPG Goblin. And you can listen to the RPG Goblin show anywhere that you find your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts for now, if it's still even up at this point. Um, any place. I haven't found anywhere that it's not on. So yeah,
Yeah,
no,
yeah,
but
totally.
thank you, Matt, for bringing me on and
My
talking
pleasure.
about mistakes and all of that. This was great.
Yeah, yeah, no, it was my pleasure. Thank you for agreeing to do this, and I definitely want to encourage everybody listening to today's episode to definitely, when you're done, go look for the RPG Goblin in your podcatcher and subscribe to it. That way
Yeah,
you get all of the episodes sent directly to you as soon as they're uploaded, and then
exactly.
review it. Give a 5 star, give Willow a nice 5 star because that's how we spread the love of
Yeah.
the
And
RPG
if you
communities.
haven't yet, obviously do the same things with roleplay chat too. Like make sure you're subscribed and following the show and have left a review already.
Yeah, appreciate that, Willow.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. So yeah, if you wanted to reach out to me, you can always do that. That's roll_play_chat on X, Threads, Instagram, Mastodon.
All the places.
I think that's most of them. I'm on the other ones too, but then I don't check them. So
Yeah, no, that's fair.
um so yeah, so there's that. And then of course, if you wanted to support the show, as you know, you can always support the show by going on to the Patreon and subscribing there to get access to the extended episodes. You also get the episodes as soon as I'm done editing them. You don't have to wait for the release cycle. Um, or if you want to support the show without subscribing to Patreon, you can do that for free, like Willow said, by reviewing the show, by sharing the show with your friends. Or if you want to buy cool RPG stuff, there's a bunch of affiliate links in the show notes or the
Yeah.
descriptions there, so you can, a small kickback comes back to me. So thanks again, Willow, for being here to talk to me
Yeah, thank
about
you so much.
mistakes. And yeah, with that, let's call it a chat.
Yeah.
And as always, I'd like to thank a few folks. First and foremost, I'd like to thank DeMille's Wonderful Works for supporting the show on Patreon. Thanks, DeMille. I'd also want to thank Chase and Alex over at PocketBard for allowing me to use their music in the intro and outro of today's episode of Roleplay Chat. And last but not least, I'd like to support you, the listener of the show. Thank you for making it all the way to the end of today's episode, and thank you for your support. As you know, you can support the show in a number of ways. You can do so for free by spreading the good word of Roleplay Chat with your friends, or reviewing the show with a 5-star review. You can also support the show monetarily by purchasing things through my affiliate links, which you can find in the show notes of every show, or support the show by purchasing things from my Etsy shop. I sell wonderful terrain for you and your games to elevate your in-person role-playing. So go check it out. The link is also in the show notes. And last but not least, you can support the show over on Patreon, or a small monthly subscription upon which you will receive extra additional exclusive roleplay chat episodes. Longer, more in-depth conversations with me and my guests. Regardless, I want to thank you for making it all the way to the end of the show, and I hope you have a wonderful winter.